So where does that leave things ahead of next year's provincial election and on the question of another referendum? Now, Tom Mulcair is a CTV political analyst and former NDP leader. He was also a former Quebec Liberal provincial minister and member of the National Assembly. And Joël-Denis Bellavance is the Ottawa bureau chief of La Presse. Hi to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time for the conversation. What a significant day in Quebec, JD. I'll start with you. Was there any other option for Pablo Rodriguez other than this one?
No, that was the only option he had left because he was losing the support of his caucus. And his caucus, which he met today, was going to ask him to resign. So when you've got no support, and also his two opponents in the leadership race that he won were also asking him to leave. And the powerful young Liberal Commission refused to sign a letter of support to him. And that's, you know, a major one. They have about a third of the voting bloc when the convention meet of the Quebec Liberal Party. So Mr. Pablo Rodriguez was looking left and right for support, and he had none.
What is your thoughts, what are your thoughts, pardon me, Tom, on sort of the way that this point has been arrived at and how short a time, basically since, you know, the beginning of November, just over a month, it took to totally dismantle Rodriguez's leadership?
Yeah, but it's been front page news in Quebec over and over again. But it's one of those cases that I live sometimes where something is big here in my home province and doesn't carry it at all outside. Yes, there are the aspects that Joël-Denis just described. I mean, it's scandalous. There's allegations of vote buying. There are investigations by the Specialized Anti-Corruption Police Force. The Ethics Commissioner at the National Assembly is investigating his leadership race. You know, there are 4 different investigations going on, and they kept denying. But yesterday, the ultimate one was, we found out that there was a fundraising dinner. A lot of people who worked for the person who organized it were told, give $500, and they would say, I don't have $500 to give. And they said, no, you give your check for $500, that'll be okay, and then we'll give you back $500 cash. So there were dozens of envelopes apparently floating around that night as people were being reimbursed. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It became, as Joël-Denis just said, absolutely untenable for him to stay there. Now, before any of that happened, you know, you mentioned it in the outset, Vashi, a woman named Marois Risky, a member of the Quebec National Assembly, highly regarded. Everyone who knows her will tell you a very straight shooter. She and Rodriguez at least agreed on this, that there were shenanigans. They used the French word, which is actually a bit of a borrow from English, of les fling-flang, basically saying, okay, there was some stuff that was simply not kosher around his leadership campaign. He didn't try to deny it, but he said he had nothing to do with it, which became his excuse all the way through. And then when she, Marois Risky, this member of the Quebec National Assembly, fired the chief of staff who had been imposed on her by Rodriguez because she connected the two and realized that she had to have a clean break from them, Rodriguez, incredibly, in showing total lack of leadership, simply decided he was going to throw her out of her job as parliamentary leader because, of course, he's not elected, so it required the best person they had to stand up in the House and do question period with the Premier and so forth. And then once she was out of the caucus, he didn't even bring back the other person who had been chief of staff. So it was an absolute mess ethically. In terms of integrity, it's something that will stain the Liberals who had done everything they can to break from the previous era where they were identified with that sort of stuff. So a lot of people are trying to say now, well, the last thing we need is to have, you know, to be more closely tied with the feds because this is what Rodriguez brought with him, this type of behavior. And it's really going to hurt the Liberals' chances at a time when the Parti Québécois, the separatists, are threatening to have another referendum on sovereignty. Yeah. The last thing we need is that. And the Liberals really had a strong chance. Legault's not popular at all, but a lot of people are parking their vote with the separatists, saying it's the only way to get rid of Legault, but the Liberals could have pulled it off if they had a decent leader. We'll see what the very snap leadership race, it's going to be 4 to 6 weeks, you know, but the Liberals federally did that and came up with a certain Mark Carney and did pretty well in the election. So maybe they've got a bit of a chance.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, sort of, for people who are not as familiar with the political situation in the province, JD, where the Liberals sit relative to the PQ and how much of a challenge, regardless of who takes over, they have ahead of them, in your view, ahead of that election next fall.
Well, the latest poll that I've seen from Léger put the Parti Québécois at 39%, but very high among Francophone voters, and where that's, you know, brings a lot of ridings and seats, obviously. And the Liberals had fell because of the corruption allegations, 6 points in 1 month, and they were like 21%. So they were far away. And especially so among Francophone voters. Now, as Thomas Mulcair just mentioned, will they be able to pull a Mark Carney miracle? That's what they'll be looking for, because it's going to be a very quick leadership race, 4 to 6 weeks. And so who's going to be able to put together a leadership race, plead with Quebecers that the Liberal Party of Quebec has changed and that they will put enough distance between themselves and Pablo Rodriguez and what happened before the next provincial elections. And this, I think, the rest of Canada need to pay attention to that because of the promise to hold a third referendum on sovereignty. And Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, despite the fact that polls after polls, Quebecers have no appetite for a third consultation on separation, he wants to go ahead still. So next year, if the election is held as we expected in October, the Parti Québécois wins that mandate, they will go forward with their referendum. So that means that Ottawa will have to deal with, in Washington, Donald Trump and the war and the trade war, and in Quebec, on the union front, a possible referendum on nationality. So it's a
big deal.
It's a big deal. So I'm sure that some people in Ottawa right now are nervous about what's happening in Quebec.
Help us understand, Tom, how that juxtaposition that JD just described, that poll after poll since the threat of Donald Trump has showed the separatist sentiment in Quebec among the population is decreasing, but
right.
The PQ has a lot of momentum and is polling very high at the same time while promising a referendum on the issue. How can we reconcile those two things?
It's the same type of house of cards that Pierre Poilievre presided over when he was 28 points ahead of the Liberals, because Justin Trudeau was a very unpopular leader and people were saying, I'm going to vote Conservative. They were parking their voting intentions there. So too with the Parti Québécois, because, as you correctly say, 65% of Quebecers want nothing to do with a referendum, much less to do with separation, pure and simple. But we could be projected into that because there are so many opposition parties in Quebec. Joël-Denis described the high 30s right now for the Parti Québécois, but the Libs are tumbling and they don't get any seats in the Quebec heartland, the rural areas. They get a lot of seats in Montreal. That's why they're still the official opposition. The Quebec Conservatives are resurgent in the polls because they're stealing votes away from the governing CAQ party of François Legault. And of course, there's the Quebec quasi NDP. It's called Quebec Solidaire, Quebec Solidarity, and it used to be in the 15% range. Now, a little bit like the NDP, it's back down to single digits. So right now, if there was an election tomorrow, given how weak the Liberals are, the Parti Québécois would probably win it. But a lot of those parked votes could easily be drawn back to the Liberals, and we could avoid the referendum, and we could avoid the threat of separation again, because it's a little bit different from Alberta. Here it's structured, and it's a party, and it's got money, and they're going for it. That could all be avoided if somehow the Liberals could get their act together.
On that note, final question for you, JD, because we heard Minister Champagne, Federal Finance Minister Champagne there say, no, I'm not thinking about it. Do you think that there's a chance he could be swayed, and who else do you have your eye on as a replacement?
Well, Mélanie Joly, the industry minister, was approached. She said no, she has no intention of jumping into the provincial scene. But I wouldn't be surprised if there is some pressure put on François-Philippe Champagne, the finance minister, to change his mind. We've seen that movie in the past. Quebecing was putting a lot of pressure on Jean Charest, who was then leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in 1997. He didn't want to go to Quebec City. He wanted to be a federal prime minister. Same situation, Mr. Champagne. He aspires to be one day maybe Prime Minister of Canada. But if Quebecing pleads with him, you're the only one who can save us from a third referendum, the pressure might be so immense that over the next few days he might have to change his mind. But we'll see. Other than that, there's the two candidates who lost to Mr. Pablo Rodriguez. Carl Blackburn, he's a former Conseil du Patronat president and also a Liberal operative. And Charles Millard, former chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in Quebec. He was from the business community. Those two, but they are not well known to Quebecers. So that, leaves a kind of a void. So we'll see what happens. But clearly, they're looking for a Captain Canada to save the Quebec Liberal Party.
And fast. Thanks. Thanks so much to both of you. I appreciate your analysis, as always, JD Bellavance and Tom Mulcair.